Greetings, lovers of all things terrible and strange, or as I like to call you, my viewership, to another episode of A Monstrous October. No time for banter this episode because we've got a long one for you, so let's dive right into Son of Frankenstein.
Every fantastic story told of him by the people of Frankenstein, I now believe to be absolutely true. I, as a man, should destroy him. But as a scientist, I should do everything in my power to bring him back to conscious life, so that the world can study his abnormal functions. That would vindicate my father, and his name would be enshrined among the immortals. Benson, turn on the generator.
Like many entries in this series, Son of Frankenstein is at least as important as a piece of film history as it is an actual movie in and of itself. For one thing, this is the film that not only reignited the popularity of the then more-abound Universal Monster series, which due to a number of outside factors had not seen a new entry in 3 years at that time, but also helped the studio itself become profitable again. It's very likely that if Son of Frankenstein had flopped, that would have been the death knell for the Universal Monster series right then and there. In turn, this means we would have been denied such classic films as The Wolfman, Creature of the Black Lagoon, and the various Abbott and Costello team-ups, which is something not to be contemplated. So, Son of Frankenstein is certainly a significant entry in the Universal Monster canon, but what about the film itself? Son opens many years after the first two Frankenstein films, and in the interim, the village of Frankenstein has fallen on rather hard times. Living in the shadow of its infamous namesake and his terrible creation has brought nothing but trouble to the village, and so it's understandable that the people living there are less than pleased that Baron Wolf von Frankenstein is returning to claim his heritage and try to redeem the reputation of his father Henry. However, Wolf, his wife Elsa, and their son Peter find only a cold shoulder waiting for them in the village itself. Still, that's better than what, or rather who, awaits them at the long-abandoned Castle Frankenstein. Igor, a former blacksmith and grave robber who was left physically twisted by a failed hanging, and the comatose body of the infamous Frankenstein monster. Deciding that reviving the creature and proving it can be rehabilitated is the key to restoring his family name, Wolf soon sets into motion a series of events that will lead to a violent and dangerous confrontation with the other Son of Frankenstein. Son exists largely because a canny and desperate theater owner on the verge of bankruptcy came up with the stunt of airing Frankenstein and Dracula as part of a triple bill alongside King Kong. The resulting success was so dramatic that not only did the theater stay in business, but it inspired Universal, again also struggling financially at the time, to greenlight another big-budget Frankenstein film. They even decided to bring in Bela Lugosi to play the twisted Igor, for good measure, and thus was the legendary Lugosi teamed with the equally fabled Boris Karloff on film for the first time. Throw in Basil Rathbone, aka Sherlock Holmes himself, as the titular son, and overall you have a cast that no one could deny was first-rate all the way down. And unsurprisingly, each of the three acquits themselves every bit as well as you would expect from such storied performers. Lugosi brings a real sense of cruelty and malice to Igor, and is so memorable that it's not surprising his character's name is the one that became synonymous with the Mad Doctor's hunchback assistant in popular culture, despite Igor not actually being a hunchback at all. Rathbone, meanwhile, more than matches the other performers around him, and easily imbues the new Baron Frankenstein with both complexity and obsessiveness as the film requires. By comparison, Karloff ends up being rather shortchanged in Son, thanks to the monster both being sidelined for much of the film and regressed back to a non-speaking state even once he's active and about again. Gone is almost all the complexity and growth the monster underwent in Bride, save for 2 brief moments near the end, which come across as too little too late. Nor does it help that Igor essentially replaces the monster as the film's central villain, with the latter reduced to little more than mindless muscle for much of it as a result. Little wonder in light of all that, then, that Karloff would choose not to return to play the monster in later films. Indeed, this regression of the monster ties into the greater regression of the film as a whole. It's important to understand that at some point Universal Pictures transitioned their monster films from big-budget A films into lower-budget B films. Indeed, this specific change was one of the main sources from which the slang term B film was originally derived. And in Son, we can see the earliest stage of that shift occurring. Not in terms of production values, of course, since as I've already stated, Son had a substantial budget for its time, and it shows, such as in the opening scenes filled with plentiful extras, or the exquisite set design present throughout, but especially in the Castle Frankenstein scenes. The many odd arches and strange angles of the wall, combined with the lighting, helps to give the castle this surrealistic and unearthly quality, which fits perfectly with the overall tone the film is striving for. And while Son lacks the more dynamic camera work of the first 2 Frankenstein films, that comes down more to director Roland V. Lee, who never was the most daring of directors to begin with. No, the way in which Son of Frankenstein represents the series transitioning from films of greater ambitions to mere schlocky monster pictures lies not in its budget, but in its gradual loss of focus on the overarching themes that should lie at the film's core. Previously, even a middling Universal monster film such as Werewolf of London still took great care in making sure that its central idea went deeper than just a monster goes around killing people. In Werewolf, for example, the core of the film was really drawing a parallel between the husband's transformation and his obsession with work, and how both threatened the happiness of his marriage. Its execution of these ideas may have been lacking, and rather ham-fisted by today's standards at times, but at least the honest effort was there. And the same is true for Son as well. At least at first. Early on, there's a lot of focusing on the idea of both Wolf and the monster being sons of Frankenstein in their own way, with Igor even going so far as to explicitly call the 2 brothers. It certainly seems like the film is setting this up as a major theme, along with the way the legacy of a father can impact the son, and how the latter has to balance the need to live up to the former while also still forging his own path as well. And then all of this gets dropped in the last third of the movie in favor of the 1939 equivalent to the big dumb third act action climax so prevalent in blockbusters today. And hey, Universal monster films do tend to go for big finales, but the best of them also make them thematically relevant as well. Not so Son of Frankenstein, which instead is content to settle for Wolf swinging on a rope like fucking Robin Hood in order to knock the monster into the most convenient pit of sulfur ever. And just to be clear, if all Son of Frankenstein wanted to be was mindless yet enjoyable schlock, I'd have no problem with that, since there's no rule that a film has to be high-minded in order to be good. Fun for fun's sake has its place, but Son, at least in its first half, seemed to have greater aspirations. It took the time to set up themes and ideas, but then did not bother to properly follow up on them. Even judging Son solely on its own merits alone and not making comparisons between it and other Universal monster films, Son still ends up feeling like it falls short of its full potential. Yet for all of my criticisms, Son of Frankenstein does ultimately remain a highly entertaining film with plenty of reasons to make it worth watching, not the least of which a terrific cast of Hollywood nobles all giving the film their all. The give and take between Wolf and the town's chief police officer, he of the false arm as so infamously parried in Young Frankenstein, is practically worth the price of admission alone. And that's going to do it for this episode of A Monstrous October. Come back tomorrow as we welcome a most distinguished new face, in a manner of speaking, to the series, namely the one and only Vincent Price, in The Invisible Man Returns.